Hello everyone, my name is Simon Jacobson and I've been teaching this class now for over 30 years, which is like a lifetime. And however, it's been an exhilarating journey for me and hopefully for many others. And it all began, even though there's nothing that's random, but it began one cold night like tonight, back in 1982. And a gentleman, businessman here in New York City, some friend, a mutual friend, had suggested he come speak to me about finding some spiritual inspiration. And he came along with a friend. He brought along a friend. Both of them, sadly, are no longer here with us on this earth. They continue their journey. He actually just passed away last month. But one friend brought another friend, and here we are all, whether you know it or not, linked simply word of mouth. It's never been advertised, and we just wasn't even planned. We just hit off an interesting conversation about all the matters that we all are concerned with, and often don't speak about, and do not really address. I don't know if there's any statistics about how much money is invested in therapy in the United States, and I think it's one of those secrets that people don't like to share. So it's hard to really quantify, but clearly it's up there. Is anyone you know that's not in therapy? Would be the question. Which tells you that when you see what people are reaching for, it means there's a deep hunger, a deep need, a desperation even, and perhaps in the modern age more than ever, or maybe not. We can't never know. But whatever it is, the human condition remains pretty much the same, no matter what the technologies and the different creations and inventions that we create for our comforts and for our standard of living. But the basics of the human search and the human craving for love, for having some type of inner peace, for searching for some type of truth in our lives, meaning, purpose, these are pretty universal, very universal, cut across all populations and cultures, and also throughout all of history. So it's always good to see what people have done before us in previous times, because it gives you a good sense of contrast and context, because we live in our modern 21st century world, and then you find people in whatever age they were, whatever century, seeking the same things, maybe with different type of tools and different opportunities, and it makes it very clear that there are certain commonalities among all of us. And just as a general introduction to the theme of this evening, which is why are you not connecting? It's one of the questions. Usually I just try to talk about a topic that is that I hear about from people, or just my own struggles, a topic that's relevant. There's enough lectures and discussions and classes about things that are not relevant. And as a matter of fact, the word class itself, I always very much resisted calling this a class, because for me it evokes all the negative memories of school, class, the structure, and perhaps above all maybe the irrelevance in a way. Many of us go to school, and the question is, what do you really get out of school? Best education perhaps teach us good tools, but some of the most important things in life, as I said, finding happiness, or finding meaning, or finding some type of sense of mission in life, a sense of urgency, is not something that comes easily. If there was any school that can guarantee that would be the number one school everyone would go to. So best schools give us the tools. It's like giving you a good tool chest. What value does a tool chest have if you don't know how to use the hammer and the screwdriver and what to use it for? So you know how to use all the tools, but there's always an objective, an end in mind. For myself personally, without going into a full confession here, most of my real searching for the real big questions in life were not so much in school. They were already going out of school. When you turn that teenager, you start rebelling and questioning the systems you grew up in. To me, that was the time when I began my own spiritual search, so to speak. And today I could speak about it in retrospect, though then I probably could not articulate it. Basically, I was like a rebel without a cause, not to sound like a cliche. Looking for something to be passionate about. And I think that's another thing. Everybody of us needs passion. We need to be passionate about something. And when we don't have something healthy to be passionate about, it's inevitable that we will find unhealthy channels, because we need to release. It's energy. Energy needs to go somewhere. If it doesn't go in a positive place, it's going to go into negative things. And that's how we look at any given situation. You can look at a problem, or you can see the root of the problem. Any problem always began with some type of misplaced energy. So you have a lot of energy inside of you. You know where to channel it, how to channel it. Great. You don't, it's going to end up somewhere causing some type of some damage to yourself or to others. I don't want to sound too general, but that's pretty much of a rule when you see an issue. Obviously, once it's a problem, it's not so simple. You can't just shut down the energy or rechannel it. But any type of addiction, any type of obsession, any type of infatuation is always about energy. It's energy inside of you, a desire for something, whether it's for love, for acceptance, for a high, some type of breaking out of the routine, the boring routine of our lives. So this is energy. And essentially every process of healing is learning how to rechannel and redirect energy. Because to repress it won't work. It's like trying to repress a heated kettle. The heat is there, it's hot. And if you don't have a spout, it will explode. So it has to be released. The question is how to channel and so on. So this question about connecting is a question I hear very often. I seem to connect with people. There's this issue, especially today, in our day and age, this is really amplified. Because you can say, once upon a time, what kind of connections did we have already? They were primarily with people that we grew up with, where you were born and where you died. Most people, 300 years ago or before that, more or less born and died in the same city. Travel was a rarity. You traveled only out of necessity, either due to being persecuted or had to leave the country or place you're at, or some other traumatic experience. The concept of travel that we have today, the ease of travel, didn't really exist. And what kind of vehicles did we already have? How far could you travel? With a donkey or a camel or a horse? And the idea of what we call communications, the communications industry wasn't yet born. There wasn't even a basic telephone. There was no telegraph. Mail, for example. You sent a letter to someone 500 years ago. You wouldn't even know if the person received it, because you didn't get any receipts. And I'm just mentioning it out of context. The world in which we live, which we take so for granted, is a whole different world. It's a connected world. We know there's 7 billion people on this planet. We, of course, don't know them all. I don't think anybody has 7 billion Facebook friends yet. But we know that they exist. We know what countries they're in. It's broadcast on television, radio, internet, and so on. So we live technically speaking, in a very connected world. So we'll call it a global village. The world shrinks and shrinks. And time and space, that was once the main impediment of movement. Traveling somewhere traveling over a vast amount of space, and it required a long period of time. Today you can sit right here in New York and watch a tennis match in Australia live. If you had to fly there, it would be a 18 to 20 hour flight, just to give an example. That's a flight. That already is also technology, an airplane. So there's an element of connectedness that technology affords us today. But the question is, what about on our personal level? Are we more connected? Are we able to be more trusting and more intimate with each other? And of course, this above all plays itself out in the biggest frontier of them all, which is relationships. What are our relationships like? I think I've mentioned here a number of times, as a sociologist, he comes around once in a while to this class. A sociologist I know, he's pretty well known. And I once asked him, it was really a loaded question, meant to provoke. I asked him, how do we measure today? How do sociologists measure what we call a healthy society? What are the criteria for what we call a healthy society? So he said, a healthy society, these were his words, he said, is number one, standard of living, health insurance, with other things that he mentioned, famine and the state of prosperity and famine, longevity, and a few other factors like that. They were basically mostly around health and around the welfare and standard of a person's life. He says, based on that, we are today in the best, healthiest society in history, because all those elements are the highest level possible. Standard of living, the comforts, the ease of access, and so on. And of course, longevity and other medical breakthroughs. And then he asked me, which was my point, he said to me, so what do you think from a Torah or a spiritual perspective, what is the psychological perspective, what defines a healthy society? So I told him it's very straight. It's not such a long list as yours. It's very straightforward. The welfare of our families and our children. And I remember he burst out laughing in an awkward way, and he said, well, if that's the case, we're definitely probably one of the lowest societies. So who's the first victim of any type of dysfunctionality? It's always going to be the most vulnerable parts of any society. And these are the children and our families. Because if we are healthy and connected people, knowing how to love, how to give in a healthy, balanced way, our children grow up in a nurturing environment. They have no defenses of their own. They have only what parents and society provides for them. They have no protection. They're defenseless. If, unfortunately, a society that doesn't provide that, doesn't provide healthy and intimate relationships, children will be the first that will suffer. And frankly, we're all basically adult children. We were once all children, believe it or not, shaped by the influences of our parents, for good or for bad, by their fears, by their insecurities, and by so many other factors. And that's what haunts us the rest of our lives. Or maybe is an asset in the rest of our lives. Growing up in a very home where there's a lot of confidence and security and a validation and a sense of giving you a strong identity, obviously will arm you with an arsenal that when you enter into the hostile world, you'll have the confidence, security to take on challenges. Should you not have had that nurturing, I'm just using that as, obviously it's not just two extremes, there's a whole spectrum. Should you not have that nurturing, then life will be driven very often by fear of commitment, lack of trust. Whom could you trust? Basically, connectedness will be compromised. The way to connect to people, because at the end of the day, connecting to people is about the ability to know whether you can connect, whether you're ready to connect. If you're not open to connect, you're not going to connect. I know people that will admit this, some won't. Some will say, my life is all about figuring out how to get the most I can for giving the least I can. Like a negotiation, a business. Everything is a business transaction, which means how to pay the least for the most in return. Which is true. In business, that's the case. That's what business is about. That's how you profit. But does that work in relationships when it comes to love? Is it getting as much love as you can get and give the least amount of love? Now, no one likes to say that because it doesn't sound very romantic, and who's going to want to have a relationship with you if you make that statement? But often that's how people behave. It's essentially narcissism. It's a me. And yes, I'll give a little because I need to get something in return. The ability to just be vulnerable, to celebrate vulnerability, the ability to be more of a giver than a taker is not so common. And some cynics will say that that's naive people are that way. Only those that have not been seasoned by life are givers and not takers. Or put it this way, more givers than takers. Is that true? Well, we'll discuss that as well. So this question of why am I not connecting, which means meeting people, if you feel misunderstood, you can't really convey your thoughts and feelings. People don't seem to get you. Some people feel very isolated and very lonely in this world because they live inside their thoughts and their own hearts and souls, and others simply don't necessarily appreciate or get them. The question is that accurate? Is it about you? Is it about the other person? It's easy to always blame everybody else for them not being sensitive or not being able to appreciate your own qualities. But is that completely accurate or not? So, I'm posing a bunch of questions that I think affect us all in our ability to communicate. And just to use simple examples, you go to a party, you go on a date, you meet someone. What's your level of bonding? What happens? Some people, just to go to extremes again, just for contrast purposes, some people just resist any type of meeting new people. They're afraid of anybody that's new. Always gravitate to the people they know. For example, you go to a party, you go to an event, who do you gravitate to? People you know or people that you don't know? Some people will immediately always look for those they know, and that's who they hang around with. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong, it's just a different, it's just interesting observation. And then there are others, actually, that don't want to constantly meet the same people, they want to meet new people. And then the question is the quality of the conversation. Sometimes you say, I really had a great conversation with somebody, which usually means that some type of commonality, even if it's not common, but it was stimulating, provocative, it was more than superficial. There are many ways we define a good conversation. And sometimes you connect to someone and you almost feel like it's a kindred spirit, someone who's gone through similar things or has come to similar conclusions. The question is, we know that we're all social creatures, meaning we cannot survive just being alone. It's not healthy for a human being just to be alone all the time. But the question is, what is that social creature? How does it interact? And how much do we connect with others? And then, of course, there's the other extreme. People who are extreme extroverts, they're always connecting with others, and they don't even have their own life. They're afraid of their own life. There are people actually that love to go to parties, but they don't want to be alone because they don't want to live with themselves. So you have a whole wide spectrum of different personalities, and it's a very interesting way to look at yourself and seeing. It's one of the ways, if you want to begin to examine yourself, is to look at how you bond, how you interact, how do you connect with people. There's some people who have the gift of gab, as they say. They're great conversationalists. They could talk about everything. I think it was Oscar Wilde that said there's some people who they know the price of everything but the value of nothing. And they can tell you the price of this car and the price of that cigar and the price of this trip and so on. But they don't know the value of anything. So it's like someone who knows how to talk about it. It's like a jack of all trades and a master of none. And then you have people who are really good at that. And they can also be entertaining. But if you try to dig a little deeper, like so I might have a real conversation about, tell me something about yourself, all the defenses go up. They're ready to talk about everything except yourself. Now, I'm not suggesting a person has to wear their heart in their sleeve and just talk about themselves to everyone. You know that joke where this Jewish guy comes to the priest and says, "I'd like to confess my sins." And the priest is very taken. He says, "So tell me, you're a Jew. How did you come to feel the truth? To come to me to confess?" He says, "Don't take it personally. I'm telling everybody." So there's some people who just they're in a state where they bottled it up long enough, and they just tell everybody everything. I'm sure you've seen such situations. Sometimes you yourself in that situation. You just get in the place where you just tell everybody, get to that point. And then, of course, there's the other extreme. People who are so locked up, the silence. And we know today one of the key things in almost every type of therapy is you have to break your silence. If you're in a relationship and it's not really working, or there's problems, you can't expect, you're told, that the other party is going to guess what you need. You have to know you have to speak up, which isn't always easy to do because we're either embarrassed or we we don't want rejection, we fear rejection, so we keep things bottled up. So breaking the silence is a very big line, and in many cases it's actually true. You need to break the silence because, like an infections fester in darkness. If an infection is locked up, it continues to grow and fester. You open up, fresh air is always healthy for the human body. And the same thing is psychologically and metaphorically. Fresh air means opening up. Carrying things inside of you creates knots and knots. You tighten up. And even physically, your body contains some psychologists call it the body's secrets. The body holds secrets. Things that have happened to you, trauma, even early childhood experiences, become bottled up and some way create a knot. And even a physical knot. Muscles that tighten up and sometimes remain tight for a long time. And some people you see when you try to touch them, they resist touch. There's a certain element of different fears that affect us even physically. So there's the other extreme, which is locked up completely. I want to talk about all these. I can't say we could cover the whole gamut of every particular scenario, but I think there's some very fascinating thoughts that come especially from this week's chapter in the Torah that I'd like to share about this, about the connecting thing. So be posing these questions. Each of us, I'm sure, you have your own assessment of how you connect or don't connect and bond. And of course, everybody understands, at least hypothetically, that it's a wonderful experience to find someone in your life that you can bond with, someone that you can trust, that trusts you, and that you can be vulnerable with, and not be afraid of, and not have all your defense mechanisms up. We all have enough we have enough hostile forces that we have to protect ourselves. So to have that type of companion, love, intimacy, where you can just be yourself and you don't have to, no fear of judgment and no fear of being hurt and so on, is definitely, everyone knows, no person I think that would say that's a bad thing. Many of us will say it's a great thing, but I don't think it's possible. Or my experience tells me that every time I've tried, I've been hurt. Fine, that's fair, but the concept, I've never met a person who would say that, no, that's something I don't want in my life. because there's something about us that gives us comfort and gives us the nurturing. The truth is, it goes back to what I mentioned before, that we're ultimately all, once we're children, some call it the inner child, and the child in us from an early age, that's exactly what we needed: unconditional love and nurturing. What does a child get for 9 months in his mother's womb? Unconditional protection, unconditional nurturing, without any strings attached. It's not like, if you do this, I'll feed you. It doesn't work that way. Pregnancy is a complete protective state. And the early stages, once you're born and enter this world, healthy parents is exactly that. They're not expecting something in return, payment or any other thing. Maybe the love you give your children, that itself is the best payment of all. But children are beautiful, innocent creatures, and a healthy parent will do everything possible to protect and nurture and nourish this child. So in a sense, we deserve, and every person deserves that, and in a sense we always crave that. And unfortunately, if a person doesn't get it, like I mentioned before, you don't receive nourishment one way, you're going to look for it elsewhere. Some people even sum it up that most of our searches in life are for a love that we have not gotten. And the things we look for in this world is to fill that void. And sometimes we fill it by becoming very ambitious and successful, making a lot of money. Sometimes we fill it by other type of so-called exploits, conquests. Anything to get. Maybe it's looking for recognition. Some say the greatest film in Hollywood was Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane is essentially, if you've seen the film, and you probably have to see it several times to get the message there, but essentially it's about this. It's meant to be. William Kane is really, they say, was Randolph Hearst, who tried to stop the film. He was one of the big barons of media in the United States in the mid 20th century, and with a massive ego and a power man and so on. And essentially, the film is about finding out that all he really is looking for is the Rosebud, they call it, the search for Rosebud, for his lost childhood, because he was ripped away when he was a young child from his mother and his family, and he never grew up in a way. He never had that. He became an adult too quickly. And it's become a metaphor for a concept that you find, the search for paradise, the search for unconditional love. One of the things that Steven Spielberg struck a chord in many people in this country was the enchantment of the child that everybody, in a way, seeks. So some of his early films touch that element. So we all have a need for that type of hope, unconditional love, the knight in shining armor that will save us. Yes, so it could be seen a little like fantasy, but there's some truth to it, that we all want to have someone that will accept us in the fullest sense of the word. And we deserve it. Not, as I said, not everyone is ready to acknowledge it, because it takes a little courage to say that's what you're looking for, because that exposes you and so on. But that's a big part of our lives. So connecting. Do we connect? Do we feel understood, misunderstood? Are you able to communicate? Are you able to connect? And very often I hear people date another, and things are going well, and then they say, well, there's a clickability factor, some call it the clickability. Something's not clicking. I don't really connect to that person. But on paper, everything looks good. Everything seems good. A kind person, I like that person. And this goes both ways. Man to a woman to a man. It can go either way. But there's something, the connection, the bonding. Bonding is a lot more than just liking somebody. It's a type of connection bond. So, to just broaden the subject and then discuss it further, it's also about communication. Let's talk about communication. How well do you communicate? As I said before, there are people who have the gift of gab. They know how to talk a lot. Not to necessarily say anything, but they know how to talk. You ever see the feature of a thief? Someone who's a real thief has a certain interesting feature. They can't afford being silent for too long. If you know someone who's really feels guilty, they usually cannot be silent. If you go into a room and you see someone who's talking all the time, I'm not saying everyone who talks all the time is a thief, but the people who are silent are usually not, because silence is a very vulnerable place, where you have people who you meet them and they always have to say something. They're always speaking, because that creates a certain type of smokescreen where they're always involved in something. The ability to just sit quietly and do nothing requires a certain peace, inner peace, which a person who feels guilty usually does not have. Again, this doesn't mean everyone who's doing that is something wrong, but it's an interesting feature. So the ability to communicate doesn't mean someone who just can talk. That's not communication. What's the secret to real communication? That's the question. To getting through to somebody. So there are all the sales 101 courses you take, how to make a sale. And there's all kinds of different tips, and many of them are very true as well. At the end of the day, when it comes to business and sales, the ability to communication is about really making a sale. Selling something to someone. Knowing how to sell. Some people say, but people are always selling something. You're selling yourself, you're selling a product, you're selling a service, you're selling this, you're selling that. But in true communication as well, as in love, as in personal connection, there's a technique, there's a method involved in what real good communication and what communication not. I don't know, again, each of us is different, but there are people who definitely have the situation where they say when I speak, people simply don't understand what I'm saying. And I repeat myself, this and this, I stop speaking too much because they don't get what I'm talking about. So, you could dismiss it that you're just more intelligent than they are, nobody gets your level of IQ. That's possible, but it's also possible that it's not the case. Maybe they're just as intelligent as you, or maybe you have difficulty communicating. So it's always good to look at yourself as well. What are you not saying? Why are you not getting across? So here we have in this week's chapter, after all these questions, I could throw a few more in if you like, but I think I get the point across. I hope I'm communicating well, getting the point across. And I want to add one more thing before I get to the chapter, which is that communication is also the element of resonance, to resonate. Sometimes someone says to you something and then you say, that I get exactly what you're talking about. Like listening to music. Music and resonance go together. Resonating music. You listen to music, it just makes you feel a certain way. And it speaks to you, right? Music speaks to people. Everybody's got their songs. Sometimes you can be obsessed with the song for a month and you move on to another song. We have our musical quirks. But music speaks to people. You shut off the world, you put on a headset or whatever it is, earplugs, the plugs, and you transport it to another time and space. So music is a good metaphor, is a good what's the word I want to use? A good example of what communication is. Because imagine if you want to get something across to someone, maybe you should try to sing it to them. I know it'll sound a little weird. You come to someone and start singing, it sounds like some type of advertisement. But I mean that. I mean this metaphorically. Singing meaning that they hear a pleasant sound coming from you. Because that comes to another issue: is do we really hear ourselves? Do you ever hear yourself on tape, like a recording of your voice? Most people don't like their voice on the recording, including myself. When I hear myself on tape, I really am very disturbed, and I know my classes are taped and recorded, and people tell me, I love your classes and so on, and I say to myself, how could they listen to that voice? Maybe the ideas are good, but the voice. So when you hear your own voice, unless I guess you're an anchor person on television, where you're trained to learn to hear yourself, or an actor, most people don't like their voices. Anybody like their voice on audio? It doesn't sound like you, because the voice that you hear when you speak, I guess from your diaphragm, from inside out, doesn't sound like what others hear. And when you hear the recording, it sounds like weird. It's not like me. It's you, but it's usually not what you think it is, right? Or have you heard yourself or not? So, what is that? So let's take it a step further. Forget about the sound of the voice. Do we really hear? Do other people hear you as you think you're hearing yourself? You may be saying something, and someone else may hear something completely different. I don't mean the words. I mean the message. The in between the lines. So communication, as we shall discuss more at length, is not just about you thinking that you're communicating. It's also the person getting what you want to say. Which one of the best ways to figure that out is to ask that person, can you repeat what I said? And then suddenly you hear that they say something to you and say, I never said that. So the question is, what's going on here? What's lacking here? So all these questions, which I think affect literally our daily lives, especially when it comes, I'm not here to talk about how to make a sale. You go to sales conferences for that. I'm talking here not the superficial communication, real communication. Talk to someone, who can you trust? A real relationship type of communication. And I don't just mean romantic. This can be platonic or friends or any form, but something that's a real discussion. And this also includes how do we communicate with others and how they communicate with us. So we have in this week's in the Torah, every chapter has its theme. So there's an interesting discussion about Moses. And I know Moses lived thousands of years ago, and you think, what relevance does it have to our lives today? But if you've been to this class, I always look into these chapters because you find universal and timeless wisdom. That is really tremendous lessons, and pretty awesome once you read deeper into it. So you have an interesting dialogue here. Let's start with the biblical narrative. What do you have? The story goes like this. So everyone knows the story of Exodus. It's already been made popular in Hollywood as well. The Ten Commandments, the Prince of Egypt, and so on. So you have Moses the Jewish people are enslaved by the Egyptians, which of course this is commemorated with the Passover holiday, and also in Christianity there's a lot of bases. I don't know if you know, there's the Last Supper of Jesus, and the wafer and so on is all based on the Passover Seder. Jesus was, of course, an observant Jew. So a lot of it is around Passover, and Passover is about redemption and renewal and so on and so forth. Obviously, in Christianity, it has different form and fashion as it is in Judaism, but just to show you that this theme is carried over, not just in Jewish culture and faith. So the story is, the Jews are enslaved in Egypt, a classic story, and this is the first documented story of class discrimination against an entire nation. First documented racism. Even the blacks in the early slavery in the United States identified very much with the Jews in Egypt because they have slavery and searching for freedom. And after discussing how they suffered under the hands and the bondage of the Egyptian bondage, Moses is sent by God. Moses is approached by God, the story goes, to go become the savior and redeem the people and let them go. Tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And we know the continuing story with the 10 plagues and the whole thing, and Pharaoh resists. But finally, after a long battle, they finally get freed from the bondage, and they start their march toward Sinai and toward the Promised Land. Now, the story has become already part of classic history. Excuse me. But I want to touch upon one particular section of this. So the story goes that Moses was a shepherd, was tending to sheep, and then he sees from the distance the famous story of the burning bush. He comes closer, he sees this glow of a bush, a thorn bush burning, but it's not being consumed. And then this is the first revelation. This is a divine revelation that Torah continues and tells us. And basically God tells Moses, I'm choosing you to go back to Egypt, to Pharaoh, and tell him, you're my messenger, to free the people. What he's doing is outright criminal. He should free the people. An interesting dialogue that takes place. You'd think, okay, wow, what an honor. Moses should be honored. God is choosing him to help lead an emancipation of the people. It's a great thing to be able to lead people out of slavery. The first civil rights activist Moses could have been. And yet we find something very strange. He resists and says to God, I'm not the person. Why are you choosing me? And this is all documented in detail. And he resists, and with all kinds of excuses, which itself is interesting. If he doubted it was God, okay, he could think this is some type of con job. But he knew it was God. How could God coming to you directly, telling you do something which also is virtuous? It's a noble act to help a people free themselves. And yet Moses suddenly, no. And one of the reasons he gives why he rejects God's offer is he says these words. He says, I'm not a communicator. You need someone to speak to Pharaoh. I don't know how to communicate. And 3 different ways, and we'll analyze them in a few moments. 3 different times Moses describes, or the Torah describes Moses' so-called difficulty to communicate. Once it says, Lo ish dvar, I'm not a man of words. That's the words that Moses uses. Tells God, I'm not a man of words. Another expression it says that Aral sfasayim, I have like sealed lips. My lips are sealed. And a third expression is kvad peh v'kvad loshen. I have difficulty, kvad in Hebrew is like heavy or difficult. A heavy mouth and a heavy tongue. It's an expression of saying that I find it difficult to speak. which itself needs an explanation, which we'll try to analyze. What are the three different expressions? But his bottom line he's telling God is, why are you sending me? I'm not a communicator. Can't speak. You need someone who's going to persuade Pharaoh and is going to be able to get the message through to him. As a matter of fact, Moses says, send my older brother Aaron. He's a good speaker. He's a good orator. He can persuade Pharaoh. Now, what's going on? What exactly was Moses talking about? What do you mean he's not a good communicator or God speaker? What does he mean? So the basic interpretation usually given is that Moses had a speech impediment, a speech defect. One Medrash actually tells the story that when Moses was a child, as we all know, Moses also grew up in the king's palace. Now, if you don't know the details of that, is his mother hid him in a basket on the river, and Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe, and she found this little baby, and she took him home, and he grew up in the king's palace, King Pharaoh's palace. Pharaoh never knew who he's bringing up, that the person who would ultimately conquer Pharaoh grew up in Pharaoh's home. Moses, little Moses. So when he was a young child, Moses was not a simple child. So when he was a young child, he was playing once on Pharaoh's lap. This is how the Medrash tells the story. And he took the crown, the king's crown, he pulled off the crown. Now, especially for a superstitious person like Pharaoh, this was very frightening. He's pulling off the crown is like symbolic of challenging his authority. But he was a little child. So Pharaoh had 3 advisors. And he said, what do I do? One advisor says, kill the child immediately. This is definitely not a simple child. This child poses a threat. And you're seeing it right now. The second advisor said, he's a baby, he doesn't know what he's doing. He pulled off the crown, so what? Children pull anything they give them. It's meaningless. Ignore it. And the third advisor, when Pharaoh says, so how do we resolve this? 2 different opinions. So the third advisor said, let's do a test. We'll put in front of the child 2 plates. One a plate of hot coals, another one a plate of precious jewels. And we'll see what he grabs. If he grabs the jewels, this child has extraordinary intelligence. If he grabs the coals, then it was just random. He happened to just pull off the crown. They put the 2 plates in front of the child, and Moses is about to stretch his hand and grab the precious jewels. And the Medrash tells the story that an angel came and moved his hand. Instead, he grabbed the coals. Now the coals are hot. So what does a child usually do? A child takes the coals and he put it to his mouth. Children put things in their mouth. This young little Moses. When he put the coals to his mouth, it caused a speech defect. That's one Medrash. I'm only telling it for some background here. But however you interpret it, Moses clearly says to God, I am not a man of words. But then God responds in the most classic way, and with one statement, which is, if you think about it, tremendous line. If you're talking about the art of communication, right here. And God says to Moses, and I'll just say it in Hebrew and I'll translate. He says, Mi sam pel adam. This is after Moses is telling God that I can't speak. Choose someone that can communicate, speak for you. God says, who gave a man a mouth to speak? Those are the words. Is it not I? In other words, God is saying, you think that speaking comes from because you have a good mouthpiece? And you know how to speak well? Speech is my gift to the human race. I gave a man a mouth to speak, and I want you to be my spokesperson. So the question is, what is God saying exactly? And why is Moses' argument is very good? You got to stand up and be a good advocate for the people, for the Jewish people. You need someone who has a good mouthpiece. Imagine a lawyer who has a speech impediment. It's not going to be very helpful for his client. So Moses was stating something very honest. He was being honest, that I'm not going to be a good communicator. God said, no. Who gives a man a mouth to speak? Which tells you that the point here is not looking for someone who has a good mouthpiece, a gift of gab, as I put it earlier, but someone that's going to speak what God wants. In a way, basically, God was telling him, I don't want someone who wants this job. I want you because you don't want the job. That means that's who I want. You appreciate it. But in this more little episode, as we shall see, lies the answer to one of the biggest questions that I've been discussing about bonding, communicating, and so on. What is true communication? And here's the interesting thing. Before we get into the details of it, the formula. This man ends up, of course, God did not accept Moses' rejection, and he insisted, and Moses complies. And this man of no words, this man of pursed lips, sealed lips, this man of difficult language, ends up being not just getting the point across to Pharaoh and Pharaoh finally freeing the Jews, but he becomes the greatest communicator of them all. What is the biggest best-selling book today, just as it was then? The Bible. The New York Times doesn't tell you this, but the New York Times bestseller list is only contemporary books. The Bible remains a book that sells more than all the best-selling books on the New York Times bestseller list put together. It would be nice if they just mentioned it, but they don't even do that. They'll dismiss it. Okay, that's the Bible. It doesn't fit into the categories, whatever. What does that tell you? Here's a man, Moses, in the Torah, who's the communicator, a man who said he had no words, a man of no words, and he left us words that influence probably more of this planet than any other words ever in history. Because if you count 2.5 billion Christians and 1.5 billion Muslims, the Jews are negligible in the context of the numbers here, it's around 14, 15 million, but you count that, you're talking about more than half the planet. You're talking about 2/3 of the planet. And one could even argue that it's affected even the Eastern world. But however you twist it, the bottom line, this book called the Bible, and there's actually a book of the 5 books in the Bible, which is the 5th book is, what is it called in Hebrew? Deuteronomy. You know what Deuteronomy means in Latin? These are the words that Moses spoke. Eila hadvarim asher dibur Moshe. The man of no words left us words that are more immortal and have been analyzed and pored over than almost probably any other text in history. More than Shakespeare. More translations, and so on. So it's an interesting irony. A man who claimed he had no words ends up leaving us the most memorable and the most analyzed words in all of history. What's going on here? How does that work exactly? So clearly there's more than meets the eye in the art of communication. And God was telling Moses the secret of communication. The secret of communication is not to say what you want to say. To recognize that you're a mouthpiece for a higher truth that's not your own. That's real communication. See, we live in a world where we're taught, or we learn from the street, being street fighters, that the way to get something is to be aggressive. Ask for it, demand it, fight for it. That may be the art of conquest, the art of war. But the art of persuasion is not involved conquest. You want to convince someone. Yeah, you can. If you're more powerful than another person, you can tie them up and imprison them and hold them hostage. You can intimidate them and frighten them into doing whatever you want. That doesn't mean that you have convinced them, that you've reached them. It means that simply you've overpowered them. And in a way, the world functions that way. The one with more power. Now, this doesn't mean necessarily with weapons. This can be you own people with your money. People work for you, and they will follow your bidding. And we all know what people do when it comes to money. Many people have given up a lot of their pride and their standards and ideals if the price was right. All the justifications in the world. So this is part of the rules of our what's called dog eats dog, survival of the fittest world. But that has nothing to do with real communication. As a matter of fact, that goes counter to real communication. Because communication means, as they say in some of the books, they talk about love. Love means letting go of the other person, not controlling them. Like you would let a bird fly on its own and see if it returns. We all like control because we don't want to lose something that's valuable to us. So we find ways to control through manipulation, through subtle manipulation, all kinds of ways, through incentives. Real love is completely letting go and seeing if that person is ready to be with you on their terms, not because of any of your incentives. Then it's real. Communication, what God is telling Moses is, I'm not looking for someone who's a great speaker, or even someone who's brilliant. I need someone who will reach another person. I want you to reach into the heart of Pharaoh. And I want you later to reach into the heart of the Jewish people. And to reach into the heart of someone, you need to recognize it's not about you. Because why should somebody listen to you? Because you're smarter? Okay. Why should somebody? I remember a while back, there was a speaker who was a young guy at the time, still young, but so he called me up once in a little panic. He called me up, I was giving him some lessons in public speaking. And he was in Chicago, and he was about to go out to speak a few minutes to a crowd. It was about some scientific idea. He tells me on the phone that he suddenly has the jitters, and he's unable to. He's like really stage fright. Why? He says, I'm a young guy. People in the audience, I looked at the audience, they're twice my age. Some of them are professors and PhDs. And who am I to get up there and just start pontificating about ideas that, some people may know a lot more about them than myself. I remember this. I said to him on the phone, so I said, so let me ask you a question. So maybe you shouldn't go out and speak. What right do you have to speak? He says, well, they paid me to come. Okay, that's nice. So you have to live up to your obligations. But let's put it this way. When you get up to speak to, let's say, 100 people, 1,000 people, whatever the amount, the question is simply this. Is this the single most important thing that everyone in the audience, and you, should be doing the next hour, is to hear you say what you have to say? You have to respect your audience. Why should you be taking their time and their attention? They could be doing other things. That means that you have something that's important enough to say that is more important than anything else that they can be doing the next hour. If you don't have that attitude and that respect for your audience, you shouldn't be speaking. That's one point I made. The second point I told him was that you're not speaking about your ideas, that you're such a smart guy. Truth is not owned by anybody. A good speaker and a good teacher, a good mentor, knows that truth. That's not my truth that I'm sharing with you. I was blessed to be able to communicate a higher truth, and I'm simply a channel. That's the bottom line. If you feel that way, then that's why you deserve the right to stand up there. So they may be older than you, but you're the channel that's bringing them a higher truth. That's not your own truth. And if you don't feel that way, it's a good question. Maybe they should be speaking. You should be listening. Anyway, later he told me this had a tremendous impact on his ability, and every time he went to speak, he always asked that question. And I asked that question myself. I didn't just preach to him. I was talking to myself as well. So it's one thing you go to hear somebody speak about real estate tips, or I don't know, or how to cook. You have all these different classes and so on. Okay, so there you're coming really for information. Facts, information, expertise. You don't really care if the speaker is arrogant or not, because it doesn't really impact you. As long as you get your information, it's worth your while. When it comes, however, to higher truths, things that are more important in life, your own soul, truth, God, faith, love, the things that are not tangible, but are so vital, there it's a whole different story. There you want to know that you're hearing something that's truthful, not just facts that work. You're looking for something truthful, and that requires a whole different type of communication. So what God was telling Moses is, who gave a man a mouth to speak? You who know that you don't have words of your own will be my mouthpiece. Someone else, I'm concerned with, if they think they're speakers of their own, they're not going to speak what I want, they're going to speak what they want. And I don't trust that. That's essentially what God was saying. I want someone who recognizes the humility that all they are a channel for someone else's, for the higher truth of God. So, though on one hand Moses was speaking as if he was like handicapped, that I'm not a man of words, the truth is what Moses was really saying is, I don't see myself as a communicator. I don't see myself as a speaker. And that's precisely why he became the greatest speaker of them all, because it wasn't about him. If it was about him, let's say Moses was a great salesman, he has the gift of the mouth, of gab, so he'll persuade a number of people. But we wouldn't be sitting here 3,000 years later and still talking about his words. Because, how long can a salesman make his pitch? At some point he dies and that's it, it's over with. Because he's selling a product, selling something tangible. What Moses was sharing was something far, far deeper, was sharing truth. So you all know that Woody Allen joke, where actually his cynical joke of the guy comes to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, I hear that the Torah has all the answers to the biggest questions in life. He says, yes, it does. Will you teach it to me? Of course. And how much will it cost? He said, how could I charge? God didn't charge us when he gave us this wisdom, this information. Moses didn't charge us when he taught it to us. So how could I charge you? So the guy is very impressed, doubly impressed. He's not only getting the truth, he's also no charge. That's pretty good deal. They sit down, they open up a Torah. It's all in Hebrew. It's all in Hebrew. So he turns to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, this is all Hebrew. The rabbi says, yes, my son. Hebrew lessons will be $10,000. This is a joke, obviously. So fine, the truth is there. The product is free, but the distribution costs you money. Now, this joke is meant to be a joke, exactly that. It's actually, Woody Allen's biting way of laughing at, obviously, a religion and so on. The interesting thing is this. The Torah was given in the wilderness, in the Midbar, in the wilderness. The story goes, God took them out of Egypt, took them into the Sinai desert. Until this day, they're still searching for the Mount Sinai. No one knows exactly where it is. But somewhere in the Sinai desert. A desert. It's an interesting place to take people to give them a very special book, special gift. If you were going to give somebody your most precious treasure, your operator's manual for life, what would you do? You take them to a nice restaurant or a beautiful ambiance. Here, it takes them to a desert. You can imagine how hot it must have been that morning, even though it wasn't documented. Why take them into such an uncomfortable place to give them such a special gift? So many answers are offered, but the answer I want to touch upon is given because the wilderness is no man's land. Had God given the Torah this gift in Jerusalem, let's say, or in Alexandria in Egypt, or in some other, or in Rome, or whatever city, so till this day, the Romans or the Jerusalemites or the Alexandrians would come and say, hey, the Torah was given in our city, we own part of it or all of it, and you have to pay royalties. Imagine we ought to sit and pay royalties to someone who claims that they own the Torah. So what God did was, He gave it in the wilderness. A wilderness is considered legally as no man's land. You lose an item in somebody's home, so that home is owned by somebody. This is a place that's not owned by anybody, with a message that truth is not owned by anyone. And interestingly, this concept, which goes back thousands of years, is the basis of copyright law even till this day. I don't know if you're familiar with copyright law, but copyright law is essentially, there's no such thing as for eternal copyrights. Copyright law basically, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's something like 50 years of an author's copyright lasts for 50 years for an individual, I think 70 years for a corporation. For example, Shakespeare is not copyrighted, not by his children, not by his grandchildren. Why? Because it's a common acceptance across the board, universally, that truth is not owned by anybody. Knowledge is not owned by anybody. Some people say it about the internet. Information wants to be free. Well, this is the basis of Wikipedia and some of the open source ideas today that exist. So why is there copyright law altogether? Because as an incentive, and as an incentive, and also as valuing someone, a creative person, why would anyone go and create anything if they can't be compensated? How are they going to survive? I'm not talking about if it's abused and so on. So basic compensation, yes, you write an original work, you get a copyright. 50 years basically means you and your children. But Mark Twain's books today are not copyrighted. We're not talking about, by the way, copyright for a particular typeface or actual printing. That's if money was invested in the actual paper or something like that, obviously there's certain ownership. But the words themselves, the Bible is not copyrightable, the Talmud is not. Any work, this is the whole debate going on recently with Google scanning all the books, right? So they're scanning books that are not copyrighted. Most literature is not copyrighted any longer. The only ones that are copyrighted the last century, essentially. Where does this concept come from? This is pure concept. This is strict Torah idea that truth is not owned by anybody. Now we all know that business people would love to own the truth, and I'll be the ones that you want truth. You got to come to me. You got to come to me. $10,000 or a lot more than that. Now we all know. Sometimes they say, "My enemies make me wise." Is an expression in the book of Psalms. It says like this. That says like this. You look in history. What is the first thing a fascist regime, a totalitarian regime does? The first thing they establish, one of the first things, is a Bureau of Truth and Information. You see this all the time. Why do you need a Bureau of Truth and Information? If it's, you can rest assured, if there's a Bureau of Truth and Information, it's neither true nor information. Because it's mind control. What do any regime have to do? They have to control other people. To control people, you have to control the information that reaches them. They cannot know about all their options. That's why you'll always see they control the radio, the television. That's what the Nazis did. That's what the communists did. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but one of the reasons of fall of communism they attribute to Radio Free Europe. Europe was broadcasting radio, but with all the blocks and all the whatever they call the interference that the Soviets tried to put up, information was leaking into Russia. But that's what you want. Someone in prison. You don't want them hearing information. You want you to be this. So you want you to be their sole source of information. That's how you control them. You ever read 1984? George Orwell. That's the whole point there. Information is controlled by the ones, whoever controls information controls the minds. War is peace, etc., etc. So what do you learn from this? That real truth is not owned by anyone. So let's take this back now to personal relationships. You love someone and someone loves you. Is this love a commodity that can be owned? So in our capitalistic and very commodity-oriented society, we'd like to say yes. And that's why we want to control love. So part of every relationship is the control game. Who's in control? And the game, we all know, the complications of, it's like a chess game that gets so complicated that the people themselves don't even know whether you're coming or going. But control is something that people want. However, when it comes to these items like truth, love, God, soul, these type of things, they're not owned by anyone. That's what God was saying to Moses, and Moses saying, Moses said, I'm not a man of words. He understood very well that the communication is not about him. And that's what God said, who gives a man a mouth to speak? The real truth will come through someone who doesn't think that they're a whole personality. Someone who is selfless, a selfless, transparent channel. So from this we learn the secret of real communication. The real communication, getting through to somebody, is not about being convincing, presenting great arguments, having a good gift of language, being persistent. Those are all factors, but they're not the main factors. The main factors come down to three key secrets. And they're alluded to in these three different expressions that Moses stated that I mentioned before. One, we go again, I'm not a man of words. Number two, my lips are sealed. And number three, difficult language, difficult kvad pez. My mouth is heavy or difficult. My words come difficult to me. Three different expressions. And they teach us three different key elements in true communication, in true bonding and true connecting to other people. And you'll see from these three things, you also see why it's so difficult. Because what's required is not just learning, you're going to go to school and learn how to bond with someone. No. You learn to school, you learn techniques. Here we're talking about true connection. How do you connect to somebody? In a real way. Not in a perceived way. And not through control and ownership. Obviously you can connect someone and say, listen, I'll pay you enough money that you'll be loyal to me. That doesn't mean they're loyal to you. That means you bought them off. They may not be. How do you basically really get people to not just follow you, but love you? That's a big difference. Love cannot be bought. It's true, people may act in a way, they love you, they're loyal, they'll be dedicated, as long as you take care of them. But that's not really them. That's you with certain incentives. The question is, can you really connect with someone without all those incentives? So there are three key secrets. Let's just start with it. We'll title them. Let's say they are, one is called listening, learning how to listen. It's an acronym. 2, empathy, learning how to empathize. And 3, trust, how you engender and create trust. Those are the key 3 things to true communication. It may be counterintuitive to some people because you think the key is convincing, the key is good arguments. No, that you can convince someone, but if they don't trust what you're saying, it won't help. You convince them intellectually, you may convince them. You give them proof. There's something called trust. So we have, let's say it's LET, is a good acronym. Listen, empathize, and trust. Yeah. LET. In case you want to. Okay, LET, or backwards would be TEL. TEL, LET. Okay. So let's discuss this for a moment. You'd think, one second, communication is about speaking, not about listening. Why am I saying listening? Well, Moses said, I'm not a man of words. I'm not a man of words. Basically saying that I'm not a person who's coming to speak. I'm a person who really listens. That's what he was really saying. Because there's the positive side to it. How many people are really good listeners? It's not such a common thing. There's an art to listening. I've discussed this a number of times because I actually did big part of my life was about listening. I had the privilege for a number of years, for 15 years, to do what's called being an oral scribe. What does that mean? On Shabbat and holidays, according to Jewish tradition, we don't write notes and we don't record talks. So when my teacher, my mentor, my Rebbe would speak, and he spoke for hours, these dense discussions, we had to memorize it. We had to learn how to absorb and to listen. So I worked hard in discovering the art of listening. And listening is a very interesting thing. When you learn how to do it well, it changes your whole life. Now, many people think that speaking is far more powerful than listening. No. Listening is far more powerful. As a matter of fact, you know how to listen well, you know how to speak well. And not only that, you'll earn the right that people should listen to you because you know how to listen. Who wants to hear someone that doesn't know how to listen to anyone else? Why should I listen to you if you don't know how to listen to anyone? The question is, how do you listen? And what is this art of listening? So really, it gets to the heart of being, of the challenge, very simple. And I'll use an extreme example. You get into a strong argument with somebody. You absolutely disagree with them. Whatever the issue is. Personal issue, philosophical issue. And they're adamant and you're adamant and the argument rages. I'm not getting now into whether it's personalized or the methods, but it's a disagreement, fundamental disagreement. The more you're invested, the more you dig in. So we all know there's also an element of pride. Now, once you're already invested in it, you're not just going to change your mind because, And the joke they tell, it's not such a joke. They tell about these two guys who were best friends all their lives. And then they end up in a nursing home, last years of their lives. They're in their 80s, deep 80s and 90s. And they got into some stupid fight. They haven't spoken to each other in 5 years. So someone comes to them and says, you're not going to live forever. You guys were friends for 80 years. So 5 years, you're going to let some squabble to destroy the relationship you had? And then you're going to die at some point. Might as well make up. So the guy says, if I make up with him, he'll think he was right. And that can't be. Think he was right. So we have different reasons why we can't give in when we think we're so right. And of course we'll justify it. We'll say, what do you mean? Why would I give in? I think I'm right. Why would I change my mind? But in relationships, especially loving relationship, there's a thing being right, and there's being at peace. You can do you want to win, or do you want to do something that's what's right? So if you're in a state of like a battle, so whoever wins. In a relationship, sometimes you yield, even if the other person you think is wrong. It doesn't matter because there's bigger issues at stake. Look, little children have tantrums, and if you're going to get into a fight with a child that has a tantrum, you let it subside. Because a child's a child, and there's deeper things at work. So winning every battle, you can win battles and lose wars. There was a great story I once heard how a guy had very big philosophical and theological questions and came to the Rebbe and asked him. He didn't answer the questions. So the guy thought, okay, he doesn't have an answer. That's why he's not answering me. It's a long story, but I'm making it short. Years later, they met again, and the Rebbe told him, he said to him, the questions you asked me a few years ago, here are my thoughts on the matter. And he answered brilliantly. And the guy said, Rebbe, your answers are excellent. Why didn't you answer 3 years ago? So he said, because I sensed from your state of being that if I had answered you then, I may have won an argument, but I would have lost a friend. Because he sensed that there was an ego involved, the pride and so on, and he would have answered, he would have another argument. Sometimes people just have a locked-in position, they're not really interested in hearing another opinion. They'll say they are, but they don't change. And the Rebbe was wise enough to understand and had restraint. That was the key. He didn't have to win. You know what? You want to think that I don't have an answer? Fine, I don't have an answer. You'll become wiser one day, and then you realize. This happens in life. You suddenly grow after years and you realize someone didn't say something. It wasn't because they necessarily thought I was right. It's because they understood I wasn't ready to hear it. Sometimes you need that humility. I'm not saying every case is that way. But why are people so locked into their position that they're unable to really hear another position? Let's get to the bottom of it. Why? I would say one of the main reasons is insecurity. As odd as it sounds. If you're insecure with your own position, one of the ways to keep fighting is to be... I remember I once met a guy, and before I met him, I called a mutual friend. I said, what's this guy about? Because he wanted to debate me about something. So he said he hides his ignorance with his arrogance. So a very interesting take. And then when I met the guy, I understood exactly what he meant. Obviously, I didn't say it to the guy. He hides his ignorance with his arrogance. So sometimes you have a blustering guy, and he knows everything. In truth, he's simply a little child who doesn't know much, insecure, and the only way he can protect himself is by sounding so right and so righteous. Again, I don't want to state any sweeping statements and say that this is across the board everybody, but there's plenty of truth in this matter. So sometimes it's just simply insecurity, because very secure people They have no problem. So you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. Why do you have to be wrong for me to be right? Because maybe I'm not so sure that I'm right. So if everybody disagrees with me, that shakes my confidence. If you're really so strong about your position, be strong and let others have their voice. Why are you so? What's wrong with that? Now, you don't meet often people that have that type of inner confidence, but once in a while you do. I was blessed to meet people like that. My father was that way. May he rest in peace. The Rebbe, my teacher, was that way, my mentor. There were others. They had this ability, and you could tell right away. And it wasn't like a cockiness or a type of a smugness of I know better. It was just be at peace with themselves. They had no reason to convince someone. I'll share what I have to say. Take it or leave it. It wasn't like my value is not measured whether you like what I said or not, or whether you agree with what I said. I'll say what I say. It comes with a very inner type of peace and confidence. And also a person does not get caught up in debates. You want to argue? You argue. The art of listening is the ability to suspend yourself for a while and listen to another person speak. Give them the dignity, the respect to let them speak. And the fact that you may disagree with everything they're saying, okay, so what? So what's the worst thing? You let them speak. You gave them respect. And then, if it's a good conversation, you can say, I heard what you said, and I think you're entitled, but I'd like to share a thought that may disagree with what you're saying. Now, we all get into heated arguments and passionate ones, and I'm definitely guilty of that myself. But this is one of the first secret to real connecting. Because when you're speaking to me and I'm speaking to you, and you have that element of listening, you already open up another person. You will know when someone's listening to you, and you'll know when they're not. So the interesting thing is, the first art of communication is not the speaking that you're doing, is the listening that you're doing. Listening to the other person. Listening to their needs, listening to the case they make. Even if they're wrong, even if you think they're wrong. Remember, maybe they're not wrong, but let's say you're convinced they are. So what? So that respect is a critical component. And Moses demonstrated that by saying, I'm not a man of words. And he lived his whole life that way. Even though he came down from Mount Sinai and he shared words and he shared... Look at the episode later later we hear his cousin, Korach, who was himself a very shrewd and very intelligent man. But he decides he's jealous of Moses and decides, why did you take the leadership? Now, we all know God chose Moses. And we also know the Torah says he was the humblest man that walked on earth. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. Korach challenges him, why did you put yourself in the position of leadership? Everybody is a leader. Everybody's holy. Why are you holier than thou? He literally said that. Now you'd think Moses would get angry and say, God chose me. Go to God. What are you complaining to me? He doesn't even say that. He goes and it says he falls on his face in shame and goes to God and says, what should I say? And sincerely does not take it personally, because he never took himself so seriously. And he really goes ahead and does whatever is necessary. And God tells him what to do. Let Korach figure out, a whole test, who's the real leader and so on. Humility is confused often. When you see someone is humble, most people think humility is weakness. Humble person. Sometimes you sit at a table or you sit with people and you see someone is quiet. There's a passionate argument going on, and one person is quiet. Many people will confuse silence with acquiescence. Like that person agrees, or they don't want to fight, or it's not true at all. I'm sure, I don't know if you remember when you were in school, every class has a few shy kids. Shyness, today I think it's different, but shyness was always perceived as being, okay, they're probably slow, or not feeble-minded, whatever it is. Some shy kids in my class were the most brilliant of all. For whatever reason, they were shy. They didn't like to speak. They were ashamed to speak, whatever it was. So don't always think silence means that a person doesn't have what to say. There's an expression in the Mishnah, in the Ethics of the Fathers, that says, Siyag l'chachma shtika. How can we translate siyag? A support for, or you can say a fence, or a sign of wisdom is silence. Interesting, silence. Because a smart person knows when to be silent. You learn most from intelligent people. You learn more what they don't say than from what they do say. Expression, they reveal 1 inch and conceal 2. The best teachers in the world will be the ones that tell you exactly what you need to hear and not more. And the rest is like a seed. They plant the seed, and you have to grow on your own. A person who wants to show off, and wants to show how smart they are, will just talk and talk and talk, and they may have what to say, but they don't recognize the secret, what I said before, truth is not owned by anybody. So the silence can reveal more than the words. There's an expression in the Talmud that says, I give you $1 for a coin for your words, for a word. I'll give you 2 for your silence. That's not because you want to shut somebody up. It's simply because silence is more golden than words at times. Think of it this way. If you have something to really say about a position, you have a position. What takes more energy, for you to say it or for you to restrain? It takes far more energy for an intelligent person not to say something than to say something, because he has what to say. He or she has what to say. So it requires that discipline that maybe times is better, like I mentioned before. You may win the battle, but you lose the war. Sometimes maybe things you don't have to always say everything. You have to know maybe the answer, but you don't have to always answer. You have to know how to measure it. And this has a lot to do with the respect of the person you're dealing with. So the first secret to communication is knowing how to listen, which really means knowing how to allow the space, the dignity of a space, respecting the space of another person. Because how are you going to communicate to people if one person doesn't respect the other? And I don't care what slogans they mouth, I respect you, I love you, and all that. Respect is not just what you say, it's how you behave. If someone disagrees with you, do you let them disagree? Or do you cut them off in the middle of the sentence before they finish? And then you give them advice, not based on what they said, but what you think they should have said, or you wanted them to say. So this is a whole thing about how to communicate. And especially when you get into arguments, that's where you see what we're made of. Now, I'm not saying this to criticize anyone. This is an art that needs to be trained and studied and learned. So the first thing is listening. Being a man of no words. Being a person of no words. The second thing is empathy. Empathy is feeling for another person. You can say it's an extension of the listening, but listening, you can listen and not necessarily have empathy. Empathy means that you are sensitive to another person's issues, which really means, and I speak now as a writer or as a speaker, you want to know how people hear you, not what you're saying, but how they hear what you're saying. Because you can say two things, exactly the same two idea, in one way that the other person can hear you, and another way a person could hear you. You see this very often with, again, and especially in personal relationships and marriage and so on. Sometimes you say, people get into certain ruts. You say a word, every time you say it, your spouse, your partner goes ballistic. And you become dug in and you say, it's about you. Why don't you hear what I'm saying instead of going crazy? Sometimes a method that works is just going and rephrasing the whole thing. No, don't use your usual words. You can say exactly the same thing in a different way, and the other person suddenly can hear what you're saying. But many of us don't want to do that because we almost want to win and want to overcome. Why should you be so crazy about this? But you never know why some people react to certain things. Maybe a certain word you're using is evoking a memory in the other person about their mother. Every time she got angry, she used that word. So we don't know what words do and reactions we all have. We all have different reactions to things. So empathy is understanding who you're speaking to. Do you really get who you're speaking to? And that was number 2. That was what Moses had, tremendous empathy for every given situation, anyone that came to him. That given empathy is expressed in the expression, the difficult, the heavy mouth. He finds it heavy to be able to say anything because he's feeling the pain or feeling the sense, or the joy, for that matter, of other people, of anyone around him. And the third thing is trust. It says the words aral sfasayim, which means literally aral, sealed lips. Sealed lips is also an expression we use when we to hold a secret, right? My lips are sealed. It's an expression of confidence. Having, preserving a confidence that it's confidential. And that was the third thing Moses had, that confidence. They say there are 3 types of people who keep a secret. Well, actually, the first is a person who doesn't know how to keep it. It's told a secret and they don't know how to keep it. They only tell one person. You know how it goes. And that one person tells another person, suddenly everybody on earth knows about it. In school, we had a few guys that we knew they never can keep a secret. So you really wanted a rumor spread. You always told them, I'm going to tell you a secret, don't tell anyone. That was guaranteed that everyone would know about it. You have to know how to use different, people. So there's the people who can't keep a secret. Then there's another person who has a secret, but they have a secret. And there's a third type of Baal Sod that you look at them, you have no idea that they have any secret. Now, obviously, that's the ultimate. Now, what's the idea of keeping a secret? It's pursed lips. It means you can trust the other person. Very often, many of us are concerned. You share something with someone, you don't know who they're going to tell, and even if they make promises, can they be trusted? And this was the third thing that Moses elicited: trust. Now, it's all rooted in the humility that I was describing, that he didn't take himself seriously and took truth and saw himself only simply as a channel. So I want to go back to the humility point, and I'll elaborate a little more about the trust and the empathy. So there's in Hebrew there are two words. One is called anav, which means a humble person. Second is called shafel. Shafel means a person of low self-esteem. What's the difference between a humble person and a person of low self-esteem? So on a superficial level, you could say, well, they're both acquiescing. They're both yielding. But there's a very big difference. There are two extremes. A person of humility is coming out of strength. A person of self-esteem is coming out of weakness. It says Moses was the humblest man that ever walked on earth. What does this mean? It means that he said he knew his qualities. He didn't suffer from low self-esteem. He knew his qualities. He knew he was Moses. He knew he was chosen. He knew his powers. But he said to himself, these are not my own. They were God's gift to me. I'm not a self-made man. God blessed me. And had God given these gifts to someone else, they would have done better than I. He sincerely believed that. That's humility. Low self-esteem is a person who thinks I really have no qualities. I'm worthless. I'm a doormat. I'm a shmata, and they say. A doormat. Person who has self-loathing. Which, interestingly, in a certain way, that is very similar to arrogance. It's another form of arrogance. Let's call it inverted arrogance. There's arrogance that expresses itself through pomposity and through boasting and so-called, blown up behavior. And there's another arrogance that implodes and says, I'm nobody. I'm convinced I'm nobody. And someone says, how do you know you're nobody? Who do you think you are to say you're nobody? What makes you think you have the right to say you're nobody? God created you, gave you blessings and gifts. Why are you so self-delusional? Maybe you're more than, why do you think you're nobody? And so that type of absolute conviction, I'm worthless, or I'm damaged goods, and so on, is another form of arrogance. It just takes on a different shape. That's a very different extreme than humility. As I said, humility comes out of strength, so low self-esteem is demoralizing. And that's the big, big distinction. So Moses' statements was not some type of self-deprecation that he was saying, I'm a man of no words, my lips are sealed, difficult language, difficult mouth. No, this was Moses speaking honestly and truthfully, feeling that he's not worthy. There are people far more worthy than him. But it was him that God chose because he was the person that was clear that he would be the one that could convey the truth. Because he would not allow his own self to stand in the way. His ego did not block, was not an impediment. So when it comes down to our lives and our personal lives, about our own bonding, connecting, and so on, the difficulty we encounter, and I go back to the early part of this discussion, the difficulty we encounter, we don't have the security to be silent, like the thief. We don't have the comfort and the confidence to know how to just not speak and to listen. It takes a lot of strength, inner strength, it takes a lot of confidence, and it takes a certain deep humility. Now, if you're a person who's insecure or has fear, and for whatever reason has to always fight for their turf. I know a woman who grew up in a very dysfunctional home. And in a home where she was silenced. Her personality could never express itself. Everything she said was always drowned out. Silence. Developing a very low self-esteem. That I'm not worth being heard. My pain is not worth being recognized. All that comes with that type of continuous and persistent invalidation. Okay, a person like that has challenges because then you start relationships, you grow a little older, So she tells her story, and this is a very common story, so it's not unique at all. I mean, everyone's unique in their own way, so what's so common about it? She starts telling her story about how she starts going to therapy, starts trying to find her voice. And all the people who she worked with were always trying to help her build, you have a voice. You're entitled to have an opinion. Which was a big battle for her, because she never knew that she was entitled. And when it's deeply embedded in your childish consciousness, it's not easy to just undo and say, oh yeah, I have a right. It's hard for us to imagine, those of us that feel that sense of self-value and self-esteem, it's hard to imagine how somebody fundamentally does not feel that they have the right. She was always worried. Anyone she spoke to, she was always assuming that they're going to be critical of her. Where a person with self-confidence assumes the opposite, that everyone will compliment you. So through therapy, she began to discover herself, began to find ways to nurture herself and find ways to express herself. Very artistic person, so she found solace in her art, in her art, and in other ways. Then interesting thing that as she tells her story, she says that then what happened was my life turned upside down. I suddenly became completely self-absorbed. For 20 years of my life, myself was not allowed to breathe, to speak, and now I don't care about anything except my own self-expression. And she says, I became the most selfish person on earth. All it was about me, and I justified it. I said, I didn't breathe for 20 years. Now I want to breathe, and I don't want any. No one gave me my space. Now I don't want to give anybody their space. And she said, I became the monster that shaped me. Started hurting people in that way. Anyone who came in her orbit, it was all about her. It wasn't necessarily always overt. And it was justified, because she said, I didn't have oxygen, and thank God she came to a point where she realized that she was destroying herself in a new way. But this was like the knee-jerk reaction, the opposite extreme. It's like someone who didn't breathe for 10 years. They start breathing, they're sucking on the air. It's like a drowning victim. Drowning victim, they drag everyone down with them, because they're desperate. So her desperation, seeking validation and sense of self, became complete self-absorption. And she came to a point where she came to the balance. I met her already at the end of her narcissistic period. And I'm not judging this person or anyone else, because I understand it, It's like someone who was fighting for their entire life for some type of validation, they get it. They can't get enough of it. But the challenge in life is to be able to find this balance. The expressions of Hillel said it best. He said, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what will I be? The healthy balance is to know that you are an individual and endowed with divine rights. It's actually what the founding fathers, bless you, founding fathers said in the Declaration of Independence, that we all are created equal and each with inalienable rights. Nobody can take them away from you, because no one gave them to you. They're from God. And the Declaration of Independence, with all the separation of church and state, the Declaration of Independence uses the word created equal, the creator. Why? The founding fathers were deists. They weren't particularly religious, but they understood that if it's not a God-given right, then if it's a man-given right, then men can come and take away that right. They needed to give it absolute value. This is one of the explanations why they wrote it. It's not because they were trying to impose religion or creator, but they realized you don't have a creator giving this to us, then one person could say, you know what, I'm more equal than you are. Which was the story in most of the monarchies, and other totalitarian regimes. The point was, no, you're born by your birthright, you are an indispensable entity. The truth is, this comes straight from the Bible. That every human being was created in the divine image. 7 billion people, everyone is indispensable. Period. And it's not because your parents gave it to you, it's because that's your God-given right. And as such, you should be as secure as it gets. You have God's vote of confidence. What more do you need? However, we don't all feel it. Because if our parents did not validate that, it becomes a nice philosophical idea, but I don't feel it in my gut. I feel I'm worthless. And that's why Moses, who was obviously had that security, had the ability to know how to listen to others. But someone who's, like I said with this woman, when you become self-absorbed and you're fighting for your own turf, it's very difficult to listen to someone else. You'll even say to yourself, I don't have time to listen to someone else. I have to listen to myself. I need to take care of my needs. I'm not interested in someone else's needs. And you could even justify it. And I'm not even suggesting that sometimes that's true too. You can't live a life completely selfless without any. You need to take care of your needs. But you need balance. You need balance. You need to know that yes, there's a self, but you have to also know when you're secure with yourself, there's plenty of room to listen to others. So the paradox, you could say, it's almost the counterintuitive conclusion is that the more you are a self, the more you can listen to somebody else. The less you are a self, the more you become consumed with the ego and doesn't allow you to listen to anyone else except yourself. I know it may sound, like I said, like a circular argument, but think about it. Think about it. And that's why people who are really have a self are the ones that are that coexist so well. And those that fight so much with others is because their identity, they fight for their identity. They have like an identity crisis. The Kotzker Rebbe said it this way, this poetic way. He said, about relationships you can apply this. If I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I will not be, I am not and you're not. But if I am I because I am I, and you are you because you are you, I am and you are. Well, that simply, in taking away the poetry, means this, that if I identify myself in juxtaposition to you, meaning everything I am is a reaction to you, then I'm not really there. And if everything about you is a reaction to me, then you're not really there. There's no self to talk about. But if I am I because I am I, I'm a secure entity, and you're you because you're you, then I am and you are, and we can join. They say about love, it's like two circles, two complete circles, one person, another person, and they come together, not like that, but like this, like a chain, and they become. A true relationship is not a compromise of someone's individuality. It's enhancement of one's individuality. You want an example? It's all over. In nature, in your human body, in music. Take music. Music has it's called a symphony of half hour of music, musical notes galore. Every note is necessary, but every note also is complemented by the others. So think of ourselves, if each of us is an indispensable musical note, right? We need each other, but everyone needs you, and you need to play your song. When it comes your turn in the orchestra to play, if you don't do it, everything is compromised. At the same time, you're part of this whole picture. It's not a contradiction. In the human body, every organ, every cell is necessary. And that's how they work. If all the cells came together, all the organs, and said, you know what, let's all suspend ourselves and all become the brain for a day, or the liver, or the heart, or the spleen, that's destruction. True unity is not cloning, and it's not carbon copies. It's what's called harmony within diversity. In nature, look how nature works symbiotically until human beings disrupt the balance. It's constant diversity, extreme individuality, but extreme harmony. So in other words, the idea of you being a self is not a contradiction to coexist with others. We see it all around us. Only human beings have created the idea of destroying another for me to be. Pure insecurity. Why do you have to destroy? What's wrong with seeing the other person, the other nation? They play a different part of the song. You play your song, they just play another song. Why should there be war? Why should there be discord, hatred? I understand that it exists, but think about it for a moment philosophically. Why should there be hatred and war? It's because people get consumed with themselves, and unless they destroy someone else, they don't feel they're complete. Someone who's complete in their own sense of self, why do they have to destroy someone else to be complete? As I said before, why does someone else have to be wrong for you to be right? I mean, the musical notes, they all have to sound the same. Every note has its tone, its rhythm, its beat, its tempo. Now, I know in the mind this makes sense. When it comes to action, our emotions, they say, I feel competition, I feel that person took something away from me, etc., etc. So the art ultimately of communication, the art of real bonding, is these three things: listening, knowing how to listen to somebody, And there's exercises you can try. Next time, as I said, you get an argument with someone you love, why don't you go over to them and say, look, I know we disagree about this, but I want to hear you restate your position, and I'm going to repeat it to you. And tell me if I'm conveying to you what you're really saying. Even that exercise itself is already going to weaken the dispute. But it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to repeat to someone something you disagree with. But it's an excellent exercise in humility. An excellent exercise in communicating. Because even if you end up disagreeing, when you come to someone and say, you know what, I want to really hear what you have to say, and I want to repeat it to you. That's a sign of respect. That alone creates a bond. You can be disagreeing with someone that you love. You know, you can have a strong disagreement. And that's the area of listening. And then there's the other two areas, the empathy. Empathy, again, means going out of yourself, feeling for another. And finally, the third thing, which was trust, engendering trust. People in the healing world, you talk about trust. So a lot of people have been hurt in relationships, like they've been in a marriage and were betrayed, or another form of hurt. So every time you're hurt, especially in a deep way, you protect yourself. You're not interested in getting vulnerable again, being hurt again. And this is common. It's like, if you've been punched in your face several times, you start wearing a mask, or you put up something to protect yourself psychologically. You don't let someone in so quickly, which is understandable. I'm not arguing that one should not protect themselves. But you don't want to protect yourself to the extent that your armor becomes you. Armor is necessary, but you wear armor 24/7, it's not exactly a very pleasant life. Because remember, nobody can get in, but nobody can get out either. The relationship is reciprocal. But people get hurt, and they don't want to be hurt. It's fully understandable. So therefore, very often you'll find people who've been hurt, what they expect in their partner is, don't hurt me, be perfect. That's what they expect. You see this very often with people who grow up in very dysfunctional homes. They search for a relationship, something very unrealistic. They're looking for a perfect partner. Why? Because they have such pain. They're looking for not perfection. So there's a statement I once read, I don't remember who said it, but it's a great line. Say, trust is not built on perfection. It's built on accountability. You'll not find a perfect human being. So a child who's been hurt wants to now meet an angel that will never hurt them. But that's unrealistic. There's no one that's perfect. People are going to make mistakes. The question, however, is whether you're accountable for your mistakes. You acknowledge. That is already something that could be expected. And trust is built on accountability, not on perfection. So the unrealistic vision, I'm going to find somebody who's going to be perfect. They will never hurt. They will never make a mistake. They'll never waver. Is not realistic, and you'll never find it. And even if you think you found it, your expectations are so high, you're bound to be disappointed somewhere. But accountability, that is something where real trust is built. Because a person makes a mistake, you could trust that they'll acknowledge it. They won't cover it up. They won't deny. They won't blame someone else. And it's in a very powerful way. That's how trust is built. You see, when Moses dealt with the adversaries I mentioned before and others, he developed, people trusted him because they saw he was not into winning. He wasn't interested in saying, I'm the man of God and this, I'm always right. He was the first to admit, and he was ready to hear a different position. This doesn't mean he was a pushover, as I mentioned. He was a very humble, but he was also very strong. But it was never about him. Did not take himself that seriously. And that creates trust. There's something you can't fool. We all know trust cannot be bought. You have to earn trust. Trust is earned over a period of time where you see someone in different circumstances. You can rely on them. You know that they will not. They'll keep a secret. They're confidential. Of the third level, not the secret that they break or that everyone can tell they have one. But that's the third thing called trust. And all these three features are features we learn and read about in Moses, and our lessons in our own communications and bonding. So I can make many suggestions. I made some exercise suggestions, but there's many ways that you can work on this. And that's really the first thing is being cognizant and aware of your own behavior. Seeing how you interact with those that you care about and you love and so on. Many people are very, very strong-willed. have strong positions. Many people talk about a parent that was very strong, a strong mother, a strong father. And very often for children this is difficult, because they end up becoming almost like a pawn of their parent, or like feeling that the parent was always controlling them. I'm not here to judge the parents, but this is an issue, because it comes down to not feeling that you could spread your wings and really feel like an individual. A healthy parent, there's no problem. A healthy parent shows is a good role model. There's a position of strength, gives you a sense of discipline. But there's a critical component of allowing the other person to breathe. Someone that needs that utter 100% control and cannot let anyone in their proximity state something, have a position, it's usually a sign of some insecurity. It's not a sign of too much strength. I know most people say, oh, that's a domineering person, they're so strong, that's their problem. This problem is not necessarily strength. It could be weakness that masquerades like strength. Again, I can't say across the board, but in many cases that's the case. And it's hard to it's hard to expose that. It's not always necessary to do so. So I hope all of us can derive from this some of the key secrets and of communication, bonding, connecting. And as I said, it's easy to test. We all have our friends, we have people we know, people we care about. And sometimes it's good to have a conversation and see how people hear you, how they see you. Do they see you as a person who can listen, who can empathize and can be trusted, or not? Now, I don't know if anyone's going to tell you, I can't trust you. It's not usually something people like to say openly, especially if they're friendly. They want to be nice and polite. But I think if you really want to find out, you'll find out pretty much. And so I want to bless us all with this statement that's saying we all have in our soul the capacity to be the deepest, have the deepest type of connections, to love in the deepest way, to bond with people. But we have our defense mechanisms. We build up our own little life. We all have our arsenals, our masks that we wear, the different projections that we project to others. And a lot of it is about protecting the inner little child that's frightened. And but I want to bless us that we should have the courage and strength to learn how to nurture ourselves, to build, and to recognize that you have nothing to be afraid of. You have everything inside of you need. And this is a God-given gift. It's not, no one gave it to you, so no one can take it from you. You didn't buy it. You didn't. It's an inherent part of your own legacy, of your own heritage. And when you hold on to that strongly and you're aware of it, you can't imagine what kind of effect it has in coexisting with others, in communicating, in sharing. And like the expression of Rabbeinu Tam says, words from the heart enter the heart. Words that come out of the mouth go into one ear and out the other. But words that come from the heart enter the heart. You cannot stop that. Sometimes it takes time for a person to pierce, but the words that come from the heart enter. So you speak from the heart, trust me, you'll see the impact. And this again is something you can't force. It comes with, you react that way. Going back to the music that I said. It's like hearing music. Music melts you, not because it forces itself on you. It resonates in you. It just pierces all those layers and gets into a part of you that you just cannot deny. It's truth, it's message, it's the sentiment, the feeling that it evokes. So it's good to find people that when you hear them speak sounds like music to your ears, and that resonates in that type of fashion. And above all, that you should be that type of person, that people can say about you that you're a person that when you say something, I feel like it resonates within me. I trust it. I feel you care. So God bless everybody, and have a very bonding, connecting week that is filled with listening and empathizing and trust. Thank you. The class will, I'll just say the announcement will continue, of course, next week. Philip is giving his class. No, he's not giving it tomorrow. And any way we can help you and listen to your whatever needs you may have, or empathize and trust, please feel free to call upon us, myself, Velvel here, and all of us, our team. And it's always an honor to sit with other indispensable musical notes and play some music together. Thank you, and everyone have a good week. Bye.